Good morning. My name is Barry Pavel, and I'm the Senior Vice President at the Atlantic Council and Director of our Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. At the Scowcroft Center, we work to develop sustainable, nonpartisan strategies to address the most important security challenges facing the United States and the world. The Center honors General Brent Scowcroft's legacy of service and embodies his ethos of nonpartisan commitment to the cause of security, support for U.S. leadership in close cooperation with allies and partners, and dedication to the mentorship of the next generation of leaders. Our cyber statecraft initiative in the Center conducts this work at the nexus of geopolitics and cybersecurity to craft strategies and policies to help shape the conduct of statecraft and to better inform and secure users of technology. This work extends through the competition of state and non-state actors, the security of the internet and computing systems, the safety of operational technology and physical systems, and the communities of cyberspace. So cyber statecraft is about much more than technology or geopolitics. The initiative's work on cyber policy and security issues looks at the broad landscape around the protection of the cybersecurity of critical infrastructure, especially in this year, the ongoing work we are doing on the maritime transportation system. From fossil fuel transport to major transshipment hubs to floating production storage and offloading vessels, cybersecurity is an increasingly significant factor for the resilience of maritime energy systems and thus U.S. national security and the global economy. Maritime cybersecurity systems serve as the foundation for key energy pathways, but suffer from much of the same types of systemic insecurities that have wreaked havoc in consumer information technology. So as a result, we have partnered with Idaho National Laboratory to develop a strategy for the U.S. to work with its allies and with private sector partners to improve the cybersecurity of the maritime transportation system. And so in that light, I'm very grateful to see such esteemed experts and government officials here to discuss these issues with us today. We are joined today by Patricia Hoffman, the Acting Assistant Secretary for the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response at the Department of Energy, where she also serves as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Electricity. Next, I'd like to extend a special thanks to today's moderator, Zachary Tutor. He is Associate Lab Director for National and Homeland Security at Idaho National Laboratories, where he oversees the lab's national and homeland security research programs. And a special thanks to our partners more broadly at Idaho National Laboratory. Last but not least, we have Suzanne Lemieux, Manager for Operations Security and Emergency Response Policy at the American Petroleum Institute. Thank you, Zachary, Pat, and Suzanne, for joining us today for such a timely discussion. I'll turn it over to Zachary now to get us started. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right, thanks very much, Barry. Pat and Suzanne, thank you very much for joining me. Pat, I want to start with you. Help us frame this issue. What is the importance of cybersecurity and energy delivery systems, and how do we start talking about this issue broadly?
So thank you, Zach, for the question and the topic. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for being here this morning and really appreciate the work that everybody's doing in this important space. Just so you're aware, my name is Pat Hoffman. I'm with the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, Emergency Response. And our organization at the Department of Energy was established to help prepare and respond quickly to all hazards, including cyber hazards in the United States. That includes the energy systems, which is our ports, offshore facilities, and vessels at sea. We understand the importance, as to your question, of cybersecurity with maritime transportation system, and that there is a huge risk that face our infrastructure at large. For the maritime system, 40% of all maritime traffic is comprised of energy products. Without a secure maritime system, we will not be able to transport the energy products that provide a reliable flow of energy to Americans every day. Zach, as you've mentioned, maritime domain is critical to supporting U.S. economic prosperity and connecting our economy to the global market. The maritime transportation system is critically important to both the economic and national security of the United States. Today, maritime transportation contributes to 1/4 of the U.S. GDP, and most maritime supply chains are extensionally dependent on it, or most global supply chains are dependent on the maritime system. In addition, the maritime transportation system is crucial for the success of other critical infrastructure sectors, specifically the security of our global energy systems. In 2016, more than 61% of the world's total petroleum and other liquid energy supply was moved through sea-based trade. Maritime shipping is also essential for bulk transport of critical raw materials as well. We realize that the IT and OT systems converging and utilization is rapidly expanding in the maritime transportation system, as well as owners and operators are presented with a whole new set of challenges. Technology is moving fast, and we must keep pace with the cybersecurity risks facing this technology as we move forward. So those would be some of the high-level things that I would like to bring up regarding the importance of maritime systems.
All right, Pat, thanks for framing this issue. And Suzanne, obviously a tremendously important domain for us here. And what are some of the kinds of systems that we should be thinking about in this maritime domain?
So the maritime, thanks, Barry, Zachary, and thanks to the Atlantic Council for the invitation to speak at this event. This is an issue near and dear to my heart. I am responsible for all physical and cybersecurity for API, but from 2014 to 2020, I also was the lead for maritime policy for API. So the two things converging are certainly close to the work that I've been doing over the last probably 10 to 15 years. For the systems that are at use in the maritime domain, it's huge and diverse. So if you look at port infrastructure, it's the systems that are used for transactions. It's the systems that are used for loading and unloading. It's how traffic is managed. On ships, it's increasingly complicated technology, whether you're looking at the maps that are used that are all digital now for the most part, the navigation systems, if you are adding on components like ballast water management systems or different filtration systems for all of the different types of regulated water that a ship uses and disposes of. I mean, all of these are now going to electronic or systems-based controls rather than manual. And so you have this convergence of various types of technologies in the various components of the system, how locks and dams are managed. There's the Suez Canal incident with the Ever Given. We still don't know really what the cause was. It was, we're talking about weather, but could that, and this is hypothetical, the worry is, could systems have been compromised to create an incident like that? We see the challenge that created in the maritime transportation system and the global supply chain. So this is something that we really want to start looking at more closely as ships get more complicated and larger. I mean, that ship was 20,000 TEUs. That's a tremendous amount of goods moved in one ship. And so when we look at these ships and how they're designed, are the architects taking into account the cybersecurity risk of integrating all of these systems? Or are they all individual vendors coming in and installing them without really that overarching look at what is the vulnerability as we start to increase the technology on these ships? At the port side, obviously there's a significant amount of investment that needs to go into cybersecurity to secure those types of systems, which weren't traditionally probably what we would have thought as an attractive target. But as we've seen in several instances, both in the US and in Europe, they are. And there have been compromises that have disrupted traffic. And as we see in some of these, whether it's a strike or a cyber attack, disruptions in ports can be extremely costly and time consuming. And so 40% of what moves on water globally is an oil or gas product. And so for our industry, this is a big concern, especially since it's increasingly more and more common that our companies don't own ships anymore. They're largely chartering. They've sold off the ships that they may have had in the past. And so it becomes a more complicated supply chain as far as how you look at how to manage that cyber risk. There are certain programs out there that our members utilize, whether it's SIRE or some of the IMO standards, but it's increasingly complicated and it's something that we really want to focus on.
All right, thanks, Suzanne. And I'll ask you both. Suzanne, I'll start with you. We spent a lot of time working on this, both at API and inside the government. Where do you feel the largest concentration of risk is in the maritime domain? And I know that's a loaded question because there's so many areas of potential risk, but obviously these are all risk management decisions for industry and for government. So where would you start? Where would we have the biggest impact if we do more now?
So I get that is a loaded question because the MTS is quite diverse, both domestically and globally. If you look at inland waterways, are a very different picture than seaside ports. Deep water ports are different than shallow water ports. There's a lot of diversity across our infrastructure. I think that actually the biggest risk is knowledge. So are our mariners educated about what these threats are? Are we sharing the right information with our stakeholders? They just stood up a Maritime Sector Coordinating Council in 2019. That obviously was somewhat disrupted by the pandemic. Are the maritime academies requiring some education on cybersecurity? We know the Coast Guard Academy is developing their program, but does our Coast Guard have the information that they need as they go out and do inspections and they're engaging with these folks? I think there's a real lack of education and knowledge across the maritime community about the cyber threats in particular. Where are the threats coming from? Why are they being targeted? What are the most attractive targets? I don't know that information flow and that intelligence flow really exists at the robustness that it does, say for some of our members, or on the, just in the energy side, on the electricity and the oil and gas side, where we've set up those long-standing partnerships.
That's very interesting. And Pat, I know that for many years, we've all been talking about awareness, information sharing, between industry players, between government and industry and others. But also, where do you see the high level of risks, and where can we start seeing returns as we move forward?
So Suzanne talked about a great foundation. Let me just build upon a little bit of what she started, because we see the cybersecurity risk facing the maritime energy system is continuing to grow. We recognize that there is an interconnectedness of our maritime transportation systems, but it's also combined with rapid technology advancements that gives adversaries the opportunity to really conduct cyber attacks from far away, but still affect the transport system and the economic engine around the maritime system. So since 2017, all four of the world's largest maritime shipping companies have been hit by a significant cyber attacks. There also have been notable cyber intrusions targeting shoreside energy networks, including the 2017 Saudi Aramco hack and the 2018 discovery of the Triton malware. In 2019, 14 maritime organizations alerted the U.S. Coast Guard commandant that adversaries disrupt shipboard navigation by interfering with signals. So the security, as we see it, of the maritime transportation system is an international issue. And it is a global effect that looks at the transportation of our products, and especially our energy products. So we have to think about how can we tackle this challenge in an international way, but look at the importance of the delivery of the products and services. So some of the things that we're trying to do is really look at partnerships with Pacific Northwest Laboratories, with Idaho, and other national laboratories to understand how world events can spawn from malicious cyber attacks, can spawn disruptions to our energy supply chains. And so those are some of the things that we're looking at, is the interdependency issues, as well as the tactical issues from a technology perspective.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Suzanne hit on this as part of her answer, and I'll ask again. It's an area that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and that's about that training and education, and once again, workforce. Broadly in cyber, but now a new domain that definitely needs to understand more about cyber systems, cyber awareness, et cetera. Pat, for maritime or for cyber in general, where do you see some of the challenges in workforce and education, and where are we going to get this next generation of cyber aware sailors from? I'm an old sailor, just sails and oars were all we needed to worry about, a couple of ropes here and there, but there's so much more now.
I think you should start leading the change with your experience and knowledge base in this area. I look at workforce development, it's everybody's responsibilities. Let's start with the training for what used to be traditional education, whether it's in the maritime industry, whether we're looking at the power industry, the oil and gas industry. You look at power system engineers, you look at oil and gas experts, you look at folks that work on ships. Everybody needs to have a responsibility in learning best practices around cybersecurity, where cybersecurity vulnerabilities are, where some of the weaknesses, be able to be articulate in the cybersecurity space with respect to some of the events that have occurred. We need to educate the whole workforce as part of the traditional education chain to really think about how do we incorporate cybersecurity in every single discipline. Now, that being said, I do believe we also have to look at retraining some of the workforce to get folks up to speed. We've all kind of been fascinated in the IT space and the information capability and capacity that's enabled so many things in the United States, whether it be more access to decision maker, faster decision making. We need to think about how do we all incorporate cybersecurity as part of that conversation. So I think it's going to take multiple tactics and multiple efforts to really develop the next generation workforce. But we do have to start with the education and the institutions and incorporating cybersecurity a part of that. And then also do a significant amount of retraining as part of current job disciplines, as we all have an ownership in this space.
All right, thanks, Pat. Suzanne, what is API doing in this space?
So we have several programs out there to help inform people about the jobs in the oil and gas industry and to go into earlier education, working with a lot of our members have these programs as well in the states and that they operate, where we are going into, elementary schools, high schools, partnering with colleges, developing programs that talk about how technology is used in the oil and gas industry today. There's a perception that jobs in the oil and gas industry, you're working out on a well site, it's a dirty job, or, it's not something that really utilizes the cutting edge technology that we've developed in the industry that have gotten us to be the world's leader in oil and gas production. So it's trying to communicate that. We also, we acknowledge that we have a diversity issue within the oil and gas industry. There's plenty of studies that API has done on this, and we really are trying to reach those communities that have traditionally not seen jobs in oil and gas. Again, communicating the value of those jobs, the income potential, the potential for growth in technology. So we want to do more and more of those partnerships. I think partnering, we've talked with the Coast Guard Academy, we've talked with some of the folks in the Maritime Academy world. I think there's more we can do with MARAD and the CMTS about educating more in this space. So there's also what we need to do more of is make these jobs seem more attractive. Even on the maritime side, we have a shortage of mariners in the US. And so how do we make those jobs look more attractive? Because they're interesting, they're adventurous. I know as a former sailor, you probably know that there's a lot of memories to be made in these jobs. And we need to make them safer and more attractive. Right now there's a story that this is a little divert. 200,000 mariners are kind of trapped at sea right now. And so how do we solve some of these larger problems that are coloring the industry in a way that it is not what we want to see as a positive for the system. So there's a lot of work to be done for sure.
Hey, thanks, Suzanne. Pat, I know that across the energy sector, DOE has been working not only for this education, but also to make sure that our systems are better, that our supply chain is secure. Can you talk about some of the things that DOE is doing to make better OT systems, make them more secure for the next generation of systems?
Absolutely. Supply chain is a very important part of the Department's Energy's programs and activities. And we see it as a core service that we need to provide in support of industry. So working with the national laboratories, of course, Idaho National Laboratory being one of the premier laboratories in this space, is really looking at testing of components and systems that are currently being used by the energy sector for vulnerabilities. We have strategic partnerships with the supply chain community, and we're actually looking at how can we test some of those products, as well as work with the supply chain manufacturers to work mitigation solutions and make sure that we are all raising our cyber performance levels up moving forward. So that's an important partnership that we have with the supply chain community, recognizing this is an aspect that we all got to focus on moving forward.
Great, thanks. And Suzanne, I'll kind of lead you on this a little bit. The industry talked about an OT risk framework in partnership with NIST. What is the maritime industry working with the government, particularly NIST, as they increase their capabilities?
Yeah, so this is a DOE funded project that NIST is working on with MITRE to develop a cybersecurity profiles for the maritime transportation system. So they're starting with LNG facilities and shipping. So we even had our members engaging with them to work on that profile. We worked with the Coast Guard on the bulk liquids carrier profile. These are helpful tools for the industry. I think the approach that they're taking is the right one. As I said before, the MTS is an extremely large and complicated system with many components. And so taking smaller bites at what is a very large apple, I think is going to produce more value as we move forward, because there are different risks to the different components. And so I think this is a good approach that we are going to move forward with MITRE and NIST as they progress down this path.
Yeah, great. And Suzanne, I'll stay with you. And this is something that comes up, very often, as we're talking with various industry partners. So what is the role of government? What is the role of industry? Who's supposed to be doing what as we help secure these maritime transportation systems?
Sure. Well, I mean, as the owners and operators of assets, it's the private sector's responsibility to understand what their risks are and attempt to mitigate those. There's also the responsibility of the government to communicate the threats and the risks that they're aware of through their intelligence gathering and their international partnerships. The role of industry can also include standards. So API is a standard setting body, an ANSI approved standard setting body. And so we do have standards for some of the maritime components of the oil and gas systems. But there's, IMO has developed standards for cybersecurity for ships. And the Coast Guard can develop either regulations or guidance. They've developed guidance mostly on the cybersecurity side so far, and we're continuing to work with them. So it's a partnership. There needs to be collaboration. The intelligence flow needs to go both ways. And so it's all those things combined are how we mitigate risks, because we know that many of these threats are coming from nation states. And so there has to be a strong government presence in the defense of private critical infrastructure, in particular, that does potentially put the economic and national security of the country at risk. So it's got to be all of those things together.
Thanks. And Pat, I'll kind of ask you the same question. And one of the audience questions that had mentioned, where are the adversaries? So we'll let you just touch on that right now. But where is the role of government? What is the programs that you see being most impactful going forward?
So I'm going to build off of where Suzanne started. I think we have to take a comprehensive approach working in partnership with industry. As I look at this, we all need to think about our risk profile and the risks that we're facing, whether it be the federal government or the maritime transportation industry, or even a national laboratory for that matter. We all have to think about that risk in doing an assessment, whether it's a cyber consequence engineering type assessment that I know Idaho does, but being able to take a deep dive look at our components, our systems, our network, our dependencies and interdependencies for critical supply chains or critical service providers, and look at that and understand the vulnerability component. So a lot of the activities that the federal government has really starts with a comprehensive approach in supporting of industry, recognizing the owners and operators are in charge of their system. So what the federal government can do is provide assistance in helping better understand where some of those risks are, where some of the vulnerabilities are, and then where some of the solution sets can be. And so I look at the tools such as the maturity models, the cyber risks, the architecture reviews, and being able to really help industry understand where some of that threat profiles or the access points may be on their systems where bad actors can take advantage of it. We all know that we're focusing on the most sophisticated of actors out there that we worry about, which are the nation state actors that really want to have that intelligence on our systems and our networks to provide for opportunistic points in which they can take advantage of the situation. And so we want to make sure that we minimize some of those issues. So as a role from DOE's perspective, of course, is partnering with industry, as well as partnering with our other federal agencies as we look at information sharing to the sector. A high priority has to be having actionable information to that sector, and so that the sector can take that information and be able to do something with it with respect to either identifying additional parts on their system that they need to monitor, look at mitigation strategies based on a set of vulnerabilities that have been identified or disclosed. DHS has all the reports that are out there from significant indicators of compromise on different components and systems and networks. That is a lot of information. So I guess the one thing that if we work in partnership with the Oil and Gas Coordinating Council, with the Information Sharing and Analysis Centers, is really thinking about how do we digest all this information so that it actually can be actionable for the operators and the owners of this equipment.
Thanks, Pat. Suzanne, I'll kind of send this question to you. So obviously, global energy systems are vital, to our national economy. But Pat is competing with many other priorities, with the budget makers on Capitol Hill. As someone at API, what do you tell legislative staffs, legislators, state and locals to help them, place this as a priority in their funding decisions to go and make these systems more secure?
Yeah, so I can tell you, having worked maritime policy for the last 6 or 7 years, this is an incredible challenge in the maritime domain. We often refer to the maritime transportation system as the invisible mode. A lot of legislators, even those with waterways or ports in their states, don't understand the critical role that the maritime transportation system plays in the economy, the value that it brings. Almost every good that people purchase has at some point probably been on a ship. It's the cheapest way to move cargo. It's one of the most energy efficient ways to move cargo. And so we really need much more investment in the system writ large than we see today. WRDA has passed, the Water Resources and Development Act has passed the past few years, and we have advocated strongly for that. That's how the Army Corps of Engineers, that has responsibility for our maritime transportation system, largely is able to make investments. And the cybersecurity piece is growing. And we, thankfully, DOE has put some resources towards this. We are always advocating for more funding for the Coast Guard. They're traditionally underfunded and overtasked. And so we always want to get them more resources to do an ever increasingly large role in the system safety and security. So it's a challenge. We try to educate folks. We've done a lot of materials, developed a lot that talk about the value the system brings to the economy. I think, unfortunately, it takes a couple of incidents to really drive that home, whether it's, the Mississippi flooding and blocking traffic, the Ever Given in the Suez Canal, I think is a very stark display of the cost to the economy of disruptions to the system. And so, unfortunately, that is a good example that we can use to go back to legislators and say, see how important the system is to the economy. We really need to make these needed investments. But again, it's competing with, people don't see these transportation systems unless they live by a port or on a waterway. And so they see roads and bridges because they drive over them. And so it is a stark competition, but it's something that we're very passionate about at API. Obviously the criticality to the energy transportation system is huge. So it's a constant uphill battle.
Yeah.
So if I can jump in there, I'm sorry,
Sure.
Zach, if I may
Sure.
jump in there. I think we also have to recognize the complex diversity of the different parts of the system, and that some people don't recognize it. People tend to think about ships, but I would say the importance of ports. I really want to just re-emphasize what Suzanne started there. But you look at the Houston port in the shipping channel in Houston, how important that aspect of Houston for energy product and movement is to the United States. I keep going back even to a domestic event from the polar vortex and the severe weather that occurred in Texas that highlights the importance of this infrastructure. And as we look at the risks facing this infrastructure, cyber being one of it, it's really important to think about ports and ships and all components in the energy delivery system from a maritime transportation system.
Hey, thanks, Pat. And that kind of goes in line with one of the comments from the audience asking about were there any examples of how CCE, consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering, works in the maritime sector. Can you talk really quickly about that?
I was going to ask you if you could jump in and talk about that, being the expert at cyber consequence engineering. I would actually defer to you and ask you to discuss some of your experiences there.
Well, I would say that the INL has worked with several agencies and has done some CCE engagements in ports, and both DHS and DOE have been commissioning some of the national labs to go do risk assessments in a lot of our port infrastructure around the nation. So that kind of thing is being accomplished. Pat, I also want to talk to you. There are other things when we get back to the awareness and education and information sharing. Things I know that you had internships for the Coast Guard Academy. You have the OT Defender Fellowship. Can you talk about some of the new ways that you're bringing industry in to look across various things that the government does and bring that back to industry?
Oh, I think this is so important because we're in the middle of a transition with the advancement of technology and just the education and the ability for wanting to have senior leaders be articulate. So the OT and some of the fellowship type programs that we are working on at the Department of Energy is really bringing together what I will say traditional specialty experts in the industry, whether it be electric industry or oil and gas industry, and really doing a fellowship program where we take these experts and bring them to the federal agencies, the intelligence community, DHS, the Department of Energy, and educate what is happening in the whole federal government response from a cybersecurity perspective. So it is an education program, what I will say middle to senior level managers, once again, looking at all aspects of the workforce development, of really taking them and having them exposed to the cyber conversations, to the cyber challenges, the vulnerabilities, and how do we make a stronger community as we move forward from a cybersecurity perspective. So not only are we doing that, but we're also doing exercises with industry, exercises as part of the community to help with that dialogue around the cybersecurity vulnerabilities. What happens? How do we tackle the forensic side of things or the discovery side of things of what is causing this so folks can take that back and protect their systems? So I think these are all education components that are very important for the industry moving forward.
Well, thanks very much. And so, as we're getting ready to close, I just want to mention that it seems that there's water all over the world. This is an international issue. Suzanne, what are you doing? How are you working with other international organizations to help the U.S. and the world secure the maritime transportation system?
So that's a bit of a trick question because we are the American Petroleum Institute. So we focused largely on domestic issues. But that said, our members are largely international. Shipping, as you said, is an international issue. And so we try and work with the U.S. federal government to ensure that the policies that are developed domestically mesh with the policies developed internationally. So the U.S. is part of the International Maritime Organization. And so the Coast Guard and other agencies do go to those meetings. We have members and we partner with other trade associations like the U.S. Chamber of Shipping that goes and advises or provides, advice to that body, as well as our Coast Guard partners. We also work with the class societies, and they're developing guidance for ship design at an international level. And so whether it's ABS or Lloyd's or many, you know, one of the other class societies, they're doing a lot of this work on the international level. So we partner with them. There are several of those class societies are members of API, and we get their perspective on these things. But it's, you know, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think that even beyond the maritime domain, in the cybersecurity space, there's a lot of international collaboration happening right now through OECD, through different partnerships in different regions. API is participating in different chambers that are working at that level. How do we harmonize, you know, internet policy across the globe? These are all really, really big challenges that we're looking at over the next few years. So we're engaged, our members are engaged, and we're trying to give our perspective from the energy sector. But these are broader issues than just energy, but it takes everyone focused on them to make sure that these policies work for everyone across the globe.
Oh, thanks very much, Pat. Are there any bilateral or multilateral efforts that are notable for us in energy broadly or for maritime in particular?
So I recognize that there is an importance to do the international activities. I will say that within the cybersecurity, energy security, and emergency response organization, we support our international office at the Department of Energy on some of these collaborations and the bilaterals and other international engagements. But from my perspective, I am concentrating pretty much domestic and how we support our infrastructure in the United States, our energy infrastructure, from a cybersecurity as well as an emergency response perspective.
All right, thanks very much. So let's see, let's go to Suzanne. What are some of what's the takeaway? What's the one thing that you want this audience, you know, if they forget all of the other great points you've made, what's the one thing that you would like to make sure that they take away from this discussion?
Yeah, I hope that people recognize how important, I mean, if you're called into this, if you're watching this, you hopefully are already there, but the importance of the maritime transportation system to our economic and national security, that this is increasingly under threat from the nation state actors that want to compromise those things. So where can we really improve our performance? Where can we bring up the level of knowledge across the system? Where can we work with our partners at our ports to help them recognize that they are at risk to some of these malicious actors, whether it's ransomware, shutting down their systems and disrupting traffic, whether it's, you know, attackers trying to compromise a navigation system on a ship. There's a lot of different vectors that could be at risk. I'm not saying they are, and then that folks aren't working to mitigate those risks. But where can we really improve our overall performance in the maritime transportation system? Again, it's a complicated, complex, interconnected system with many moving components. Some of it's owned by the federal government, some of it's owned by the private sector, some of it's owned by the state. Or, you know, if you look at the Port Authority in New Jersey, that's owned by multiple states. So how do we work with all these different actors to really bring up the level of knowledge and performance and understanding about overall system security, but then the cybersecurity of some of these particularly important systems?
All right, thanks, Suzanne. Pat, to you.
So my closing thoughts is, as we think about infrastructure investments moving forward, as we think about and discussions evolve under the American Jobs Plan, how do we make sure that we incorporate cybersecurity inherent to those investments? Let's start getting ahead of the game with respect to building capabilities as we invest in our infrastructure. So it is cyber monitoring capabilities, it is cyber assessment capabilities, it is mitigation solutions, it is a constant diligence with respect to evaluations that are going to have to occur in our infrastructure to stay ahead and to stay in pace with the cybersecurity challenges of today and of tomorrow. So my closing comments and my final comments really is, as we invest in infrastructure, let's build cybersecurity in, and let's make sure that that is in the forefront in some of the conversations from as we look at expanding our economy and growing and creating jobs, that there is a role for cybersecurity as part of that dialogue.
All right, thanks, Pat. Thanks so very much. Well, in wrapping up, I'd like to thank the Atlantic Council for hosting this event. Pat Hoffman, Suzanne Lemieux, thank you very much for joining us. And to the audience, thank you for listening to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.